Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for being here, thank you for watching. This week, mercifully not a whole lot on the agenda. I only got to check out 2 new movies in cinemas this week, although I want to use the extra time as well to talk about a couple of really great TV episodes that I think are 2 of the best that I've seen this entire year. This shorter sort of agenda is definitely not going to be the same next week because this weekend is the Cinema One Originals Film Festival 2019 and I'm just going to spend like 3 whole days at that festival, so we'll talk about that next week. But for now, just a few things. Let's just jump into the TV episodes for now. So the first great episode of TV that I want to talk about this week is the 3rd episode of Watchmen on HBO. This one is entitled She Was Killed by Space Junk, if I'm not mistaken. This episode really sort of solidified Watchmen to me as maybe the best superhero TV show we've gotten in like the modern era of TV. And what makes this episode the best of the series so far, which is saying a lot for me, is, well, one of the reasons is that the episode is told pretty much entirely from the perspective of Laurie Blake, who is a returning character from the original graphic novel. She was the second Silk Spectre, but now she's an FBI agent. And seeing the conflict between the military and the 7th Cavalry through her eyes makes us consider lots of different other aspects of this conflict. But not only that, her perspective also ends up confirming the existence of several characters from the original Watchmen, and that's extremely exciting. It blows up the entire premise of the series and makes everything possible now. But of course, another reason why this episode is so good is that Laurie Blake is played by Jean Smart, who is just, she bursts onto the scene as this huge, just force of nature. She has so much charisma, she's so funny, and what I love about how she plays this character, who is instantly like the most interesting character on the show, which is again saying a lot, is that she has a ton of baggage based on her days as a vigilante herself and her bitterness about that previous life. But she also has like no regard for how serious everybody else is. Like, she does not care about anyone else and she'll just keep cracking jokes. It's an incredible performance in an incredible episode of TV. That's probably like the most well-written episode that I've seen like in a while. So if you're not watching Watchmen yet, please do check it out. Please do give it a chance. It's so much more than I feel that a lot of people are making it out to be. However, as good as that episode of Watchmen was this week, to me that wasn't my favorite episode of the week. My favorite episode of this past week was the 5th episode of the final season of Mr. Robot, entitled 405 Method Not Allowed. This episode pretty much focuses entirely on one heist that Elliot and Darlene have to pull off, but the kicker is that there is pretty much no dialogue in this entire episode. There's like 8 words spoken at the beginning, 4 words at the end, but for the most part this is 49 minutes of no one talking and people trying to like hack into a place with no dialogue, and it's absolutely incredible. This is the most tense that Mr. Robot has been in like a full year or like 2 years. It's probably the most suspenseful hour of TV that I've seen so far this year. And because there's no dialogue in it and the characters can't speak or else they'll get busted, the episode really has to rely on very deliberate editing and visual storytelling, which Mr. Robot has proven time and time again that it really knows how to do that. The creator of the show, Sam Esmail, who again directed every single episode, really continues to prove just how talented he is. The things that Sam Esmail does to get tension out of situations is just incredible, and the way he pushes it in this episode is just, it's something else. And I can imagine some people going into an episode like this without having seen like previous Mr. Robot seasons and thinking that it's a little gimmicky, and I understand that. But I guess as someone who's loved the show since the beginning, I can watch an episode like this and not really consider it a gimmick anymore, because the form of Mr. Robot has always been such a huge part of the storytelling. Just like the way it looks and the sort of things it pulls off. Like last season, they had an entire episode that was made to look like it was done in one shot. They have like huge twists every season that has just become really part of the show's DNA. So I love it. I love this episode so much, and I don't know why more people aren't watching Mr. Robot. Now let's move on to the 2 movies that I got to watch this week. So the first one is Doctor Sleep. This is written and directed by Mike Flanagan, and it's based on the novel by Stephen King, who wrote it as a sequel to The Shining. And the funny thing about this movie is, even if I didn't really have the highest hopes for it, I was still anticipating it a lot, and I ended up just loving the experience. I loved watching this movie, even if I do recognize that it has its own flaws. Normally, I don't count unpredictability or originality as a real sort of indicator of quality. Like, I really don't think it's a fair metric for quality. However, the unpredictability of this movie in particular really did put me on edge, and I felt like it really enhanced the experience. Because what this movie does, at least in the first half, is really weave together these three separate subplots to build this world centered around the idea of these children who are abused and experience violence by this other group of people that really wants to just use that youth and that energy to live forever. It's a really interesting premise that is put together so neatly and so cleverly without ever really explaining anything to the audience. Unfortunately, I don't think that the movie really lives up to the potential of its setup, especially with the characters. I don't think the main characters really go on very interesting arcs, or they don't really reach very satisfying conclusions, in my opinion. Especially the main antagonist of the film, Rose the Hat, who's played by Rebecca Ferguson, who's very good in the movie, but she never really registered as a threat to me. Like, every time she was sort of facing off against the heroes, I really wasn't worried for the heroes, so that's kind of a problem. But really, the main takeaway from Doctor Sleep is that Mike Flanagan just continues to become such a great genre director. The way he visualizes like these very abstract concepts, these very psychological face-offs in this movie, he does them in such creative ways that are always so fun to watch, but they're so legible at the same time. Like, you're never really confused about what's going on. He just, gives you something, and you're just able to catch on. Like, he's just really good at doing that. It's a really enjoyable movie. I think that if you're open-minded and you walk into it knowing that it's really more like a dark fantasy thing than a horror movie, I think you'll find it really rewarding. But the main movie that I want to talk about for this past week is The Lighthouse, which was the opening film of the Cinema One Originals Festival this year. This is directed by Robert Eggers, also co-written by him. He's the guy who did The Witch, which is a movie that I really love from a few years ago. And it stars Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson as two lighthouse keepers who are pretty much just stuck on this island for 2 hours, and they slowly kind of go crazy. This is easily one of the best movies of the year. I've been waiting all year for a horror movie like this, and I'm so glad we have it, even if it's not what you might expect from a horror movie. And, okay, there's so many things to talk about when it comes to The Lighthouse. So first of all, it's a really beautiful movie, and I think it would be easy to call it beautiful just because it's black and white, but it's not just because it's black and white. It's because the black and white specifically is, like, the grain of it and the lighting in it is just so authentic. Like, it feels and looks like a movie that was shot in the 40s and was buried, and then only now did we exhume its body and, like, witness what it actually is. And even more than the cinematography, the production design is absolutely incredible. Like, I have no idea where they filmed this, if they actually built everything, but every single inch of the production design, every single space that these characters inhabit has the potential for horror or surrealist whatever. It really sells the idea that this place, this island that they're on, is somehow this intersection of different realities or dimensions. But again, I want to stress that when you walk into this movie, it is really nothing like you might be expecting. Like, it's so hard to compare it to anything else, even Robert Eggers' previous film, because it's just different and strange and new. And that might be good for some people, it might not be good for others. For me personally, I didn't think this movie was perfect by any stretch. I felt like there were certain parts of the film that didn't really add to the whole. I felt that it still had a little bit of fat on it. But with that said, even if the movie doesn't give you a whole lot of dialogue and doesn't explain anything at all, I think that its examination of truth and identity is surprisingly thorough, and I think that the possibilities that it leads to are all appropriately messed up. Like, just thinking about what this movie might mean is already satisfying because every single possibility is disturbing. And of course, the acting is fantastic. Willem Dafoe is so good as this older lighthouse keeper who is, on one hand, really like the ultimate sailor stereotype, but at the same time, he just makes this character so interesting because he's really eloquent, but he's also very vulnerable about like the strangest things, and it just makes for a really entertaining, memorable character. The one who really impressed me and who continues to impress me is Robert Pattinson. And if you still don't know that Robert Pattinson is probably one of our best young character actors working today, you should definitely watch The Lighthouse. What I like so much about Pattinson's approach to this character is that from the very beginning he shows us that this character has this need to be respected, to be treated as an equal, whether or not he really deserves it. And throughout the movie, even toward the end, he holds on to that stubbornness. So from one point of view, you might see that his character has sort of stayed the same and true to himself. But from another angle, you'll be able to see that it's that stubbornness itself that's led to his growing insanity as well. It's a really subtle performance that I think Pattinson does such a good job with. But of course, the real star of this movie is Robert Eggers, who is just an incredible beast of a director. He's probably the best of the new wave of horror directors we've gotten in recent years. Just the way he shoots some of the scenes here, like, I don't know how he came up with these angles and these approaches. Just the way he frames certain characters or blocks them when they're moving through terrain tells a story. And certain shots he has really gives you the impression that there are eyes everywhere, that these guys are being watched from every single angle and every single location. And I've seen a few reviews knocking on both The Lighthouse and Dr. Sleep because they aren't scary. And that bothers me a little bit. Like, I guess I'm gonna go back to the horror episode I did a week ago. And I don't know, I'll offer the suggestion that maybe these movies aren't trying to be scary. Maybe the goals that they're setting up for themselves are different. And I think that's fine. I think that it's unfair to walk into a movie that has been marketed as a horror film and to bring with us expectations of how that kind of film should play out. But I think that both Dr. Sleep and The Lighthouse are very clearly from the very beginning showing us that they're trying to do something else. They're trying to tell a different kind of story. So for me, I don't need movies like Dr. Sleep and The Lighthouse to be scary in order to become successful. I think Dr. Sleep is at its most successful when it steps away from the shadow of its predecessor, which is very hard to do. But when it does do that, like, it becomes so much more intriguing and entertaining. While The Lighthouse for me already succeeds just because it manages to replicate the experience of being hungry and isolated and disoriented in the middle of nowhere. Like, it just puts you into that situation so well that I don't necessarily need it to keep me up at night for me to call it a great horror film. And yeah, I just think that that's already an achievement worth celebrating, and I think the more we sort of divorce ourselves from our own expectations of how genre films are supposed to work, and just, you know, we have to let ourselves be open to the different directions that horror directors can take us, I think that's just gonna be much better for everyone involved. Okay, so those are my thoughts on The Lighthouse and Dr. Sleep and a couple of great episodes of TV that came out this week. Thank you again, guys, for watching. Thank you for being here. If you have any thoughts about anything I spoke about, please do leave me a comment and let's have a conversation.